What's up, everybody, and welcome back to what is a long overdue episode in the series. Looking back quickly at what we did last episode, we began by accepting a pair of contracts for Lunar Flyby and Lunar Impact, both of which would have far more impact on our program than first anticipated. We also successfully launched on the first try the first ever solar-powered satellite aboard the Silverbrand ORB. We also successfully launched the first sun-synchronous satellite, although the first failed ultimately to get into orbit, as we had some issues with getting connections to the ground track stations, and we had to perform a second launch. The second, of course, was in fact successful. Pilot Frank Green aboard our X-15 performed a record-setting flight and became the first ever to obtain his astronaut wings in our program, successfully completing a 150-kilometer altitude suborbital hop aboard the Dash 2 variant of our X-15. In order to accelerate the research and development, we launched a series of scientific dedicated satellites, Explorers 4, 5, and 6. Explorer 4, of course, failed to reach into orbit as the engine on the Silverbrand failed. Explorer 6 was basically a repeat of that mission. Episode 11 finished, with the lunar contract deadline very fast approaching, and we begin this episode right where we left off, with 104 days left. Fearing the worst and being in a desperate plight to meet the fast approaching deadline, we pick up an additional pair of contracts to help secure the funding we'll need for the daunting task that lies ahead. And so, as soon as Frank Green is back from his record-setting flight, he's right back into the training room preparing for the next one. To further secure our financial future in the program, pilot Frank Green hops back into the X-15 for a no-holds-bar attempt at an unrestricted free-climb altitude record-setting flight. The ventral fin is immediately jettisoned in order to absolutely minimize all weight and drag. Once the fuel reserves have depleted from the drop tanks, those are jettisoned as soon as possible. Adopting a nearly 90-degree nose-up attitude, we make for the steepest and fastest climb. incredibly steep ascent comes an incredibly steep descent. And so prepping for re-entry now, we adopt the typical nose-down attitude, this time employing full brakes and even flaps in order to help minimize the amount of heat generated and slow us down as much as possible. Though we encounter a bit of a shimmy around the 12-kilometer mark coming down, recovery happens rather quickly and without too much pilot input being required. On final approach, I misjudged the alignment with the runway slightly, and so we ended up coming in a little hotter than we normally would, hitting the tarmac at about 155. The X-15 immediately pitched up uncontrollably, and with only a fraction of a second to assess the situation, pilot Frank Green decided that it was best to simply punch out of there in order to save his life. Although the X-15 is destroyed in the accident, the mission is still a success, and pilot Frank Green further secures his place in the record books, having now set another altitude record, this time at 205 kilometers. Key to ensuring the success and survival of our program. Missions like this one are essential. Not only do they secure an additional amount of funding, but they also help open the door to greater contracts and greater milestones further down the road. And so succeeding these smaller missions is absolutely critical to the future of our program. With the satellite now successfully deployed, all we needed to do was use the onboard thrusters in order to adjust our perigee value to the required minimum value of 300 kilometers. the lunar contract deadline fast approaching, every attempt to secure funding and the future of the program is welcomed with open arms. And so it is that our famed and highly successful XSP-3D is taken out of retirement, prepped, refueled, and sent aloft again to do what it does best: set high-speed altitude records. Working through our launch manifest while ever mindful of the lunar contract deadline, Weather I-1 launches as it aims to be the first in a series of weather observing satellites. contract requirements stated a minimum perigee value of 300 kilometers and an eccentricity value of less than 0.05. Unfortunately, our initial parking orbit with an apogee value of 2,800 kilometers proved to be the downfall of this mission. Fuel reserves were exhausted, with the perigee requirement being met, but not eccentricity. The greatest risks facing our lunar flyby and impact mission is the lack of flight time on what will be the power plants of our next generation of rockets. In an attempt to gain at least some flight time and improve reliability, even if only but a little, a single LR-89 engine affixed to a previously tooled tank from the Silverbrand production line, the whole utilizing the spaceplane hangar to complete, is assembled and launched. Our calendar being squeezed to such an extent meant that this test flight occurred just a few days before the very first lunar launch attempt would occur. When we started this episode, there were 104 days left on the lunar contract deadline. Not knowing if we would be able to achieve that milestone, I decided to run some numbers. At that time, with previous required tooling and purchasing requirements having been completed, we were left with 9,900 funds at our disposal. Accepting the first geostationary and early navigation contracts secure for us an additional 30,000 and 24,000 funds respectively, bringing our grand total to 63,900 funds. At our current build rate, our Lunar 1 mission requires 128 days to build, with roughly 10 days required for rollout. With an estimate of 5 days travel time to the moon and a 1-day grace period to account for errors, our total mission time would be 144 days, meaning that we need to shave off 40 days of our build time in order to fall under the 104-day limit. Rushing the build 4 times brings us all the way down to 84 days, falling below the max allowed value of 88 by a total of 4 days. Initial cost of 6,400 with an additional 54,000 required to accelerate the build leaves us with 3,200 funds, meaning that financially at least the target can be met. In the end, we find ourselves to within 4 days of allowable values. However, research of the lunar comms would not finish until 4 days after Lunar 1 hardware would be complete, meaning that our rocket would have to wait for 4 days before rollout while comms finished researching, bringing our margins to contract deadline to potentially less than 24 hours. The greatest risk to the mission and the greatest unknown was whether or not all of the previously unproven and unflown engines would perform. Adding to the risk is the fact that neither the Atlas rocket or its Baker upper stage had ever been flown before, nor had the pair been mated and flown together. As fate would have it, all engines, with the exception of one of the verniers, lit. What we needed now was a full duration burn from all remaining engines. Moments before staging of the skirt with the booster engines was set to occur, the port side engine failed, inducing a hard yaw. As a result, the skirt was prematurely jettisoned, and although some minor clipping did occur, staging was successfully achieved. With the good staging of the second stage, another critical milestone was now behind us, and the flight entered into what I consider to be the least risky part of the mission, with both XLR-11 engines powering the Baker upper stage, having amassed a significant amount of flight time and high fidelity rate. The current objective then was to now enter into a good parking orbit. The last remaining threat to the mission and critical milestone is TLI. Our kickstage engine, similar to the XLR-11s on the second stage, has amassed lots of flight time and achieved high fidelity rates, but nothing is ever really certain. To achieve a good TLI burn requires perfect kickstage performance. Our engine needs to light and burn for the exact duration of the required burn length, all the while executing with millimeter precision orientation. Against all odds, an unlikely hero emerged. The never-before-flown Atlas Baker rocket achieved every single objective that was laid before it, and a nearly flawless insertion burn achieved, requiring only a single and minor correction burn. Lunar 1, the first probe in history ever to do so, had broken the surly bonds of Earth and was now headed for a collision course with the Moon. that's gonna do it for this episode, and what an episode it was. I really hope you enjoyed it. And in case you're wondering, no, I did not stage the timing of these events. I literally did not know if we were going to be able to make it or not. Nor did I stage the performance of the Atlas Baker rocket. It really did perform the way it did on the very first take. If you like the show, if you like the content, and you'd like to help support it in any way, it always helps for you to like, share, and subscribe. You can follow me on Reddit and follow me on Twitter. I like to interact and post stuff there as well. Until next time, I'll see you on the next flight.